There's nothing quite like floating in your own backyard pool on a scorching summer day. Ice-cold lemonade within reach, favorite playlist drifting through the air, and absolutely zero obligations for the next few hours. That perfect moment of peace I'd been looking forward to all week. The reward for overtime shifts and careful budgeting that made this modest home with a pool finally possible after years of apartment living. A moment that was shattered by the sound of my gate swinging open and the splash of strangers diving into my pool. Before I dive into this bizarre confrontation, drop a comment below if you've ever had someone try to claim something that was clearly yours. I'm curious how common these entitled encounters really are. I had been floating peacefully for maybe 20 minutes that Saturday when I heard the metallic click of my gate latch. Opening my eyes, I spotted a woman in designer sunglasses marching purposefully into my backyard like she owned the place. Behind her trailed 3 children, all carrying pool toys and towels, chattering excitedly. For a moment I wondered if I'd somehow forgotten about guests coming over. But I definitely didn't know this woman with her highlighted bob haircut, expensive-looking cover-up, and the determined set of her shoulders. I sat up on my float. Hello? Can I help you?" The woman barely glanced my way as she directed the children where to put their things. On my patio furniture. "We won't be long," she called over her shoulder. "The kids just need to cool off for a bit." I paddled to the pool's edge, utterly confused. "I'm sorry, but who are you? This is my private property." That got her attention. She lowered her sunglasses, examining me with a look of mild irritation, as if I was the one who had somehow interrupted her day. "I'm Karen Matthews. We live in the grey colonial on Maple Street." She gestured vaguely in a direction that could have included half the neighborhood. "The Davidson kids are friends with my Bryson and Madison." This explained nothing. I climbed out of the pool as the children, completely oblivious to the awkward interaction, began jumping into the deep end. "Nice to meet you, but why are you in my backyard?" I asked, trying to keep my tone polite despite my growing confusion. Karen's expression shifted to one of practiced patience, like she was explaining something obvious to someone very slow. "The community pool access. The Williamsons always allowed neighborhood children to use the pool during summer afternoons." The Williamsons, the previous owners who had sold me the house 2 years ago. "I'm not the Williamsons," I said carefully. "And this isn't a community pool. It's my private backyard." Karen waved dismissively while unpacking what appeared to be an entire picnic onto my patio table. "Oh, we all know it's technically on your property, but there's been an arrangement for years. Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, weekend mornings. The neighborhood parents take turns supervising." I stood dripping on my own patio, struggling to process this bizarre situation. "Ma'am, I've owned this house for 2 years, and this is the first I'm hearing about any arrangement. Nobody has ever tried to use my pool before." "Well, we just moved here 6 months ago ourselves, but everyone told us about the pool schedule." She looked up from arranging plates. "The Davidsons specifically mentioned it when we were house hunting. It was a selling point for the neighborhood." Watched in disbelief as she proceeded to set up for what appeared to be a full afternoon by my pool. Meanwhile, one of the children had found my pool float's storage and was distributing my personal belongings among the others. "I need you to understand," I said more firmly now. "There is no arrangement. This is private property, my property. I need you and the children to pack up and leave, please." Karen's friendly demeanor instantly transformed. Her smile tightened, and her eyes narrowed behind designer frames. "Listen, I don't think you understand how things work in this neighborhood," she said, her voice dropping slightly. "Everyone contributes to the community here. The Williamsons understood that. I'm sure you don't want to start off on the wrong foot with your neighbors." There was something vaguely threatening in her tone that caught me off guard. "This isn't about being neighborly," I explained. "It's about property rights and liability. If someone got hurt in this pool, no one's going to get hurt," she cut me off. "I'm watching them, and we all signed the waiver years ago anyway." "Waiver? What waiver?" This was becoming more bizarre by the second. "I never signed anything, and I've never agreed to strangers using my pool. I need you to leave, now." I was trying to remain calm, but my patience was evaporating faster than the water droplets on the hot concrete. Karen crossed her arms, planting herself firmly on my patio. We'll be done in 2 hours. The children have been looking forward to this all week. Unless you want to be known as the person who made children cry during a heatwave, I suggest you just relax. As if to emphasize her point, she sat down in my patio chair, pulled out her phone, and began scrolling, clearly considering, the conversation over. I stood there dripping and incredulous as strangers took over my backyard on a Saturday afternoon. This wasn't just entitlement. This was a bizarrely confident invasion of private property. Little did I know this unexpected visit was just the beginning of a neighborhood battle that would eventually require police intervention, community meetings, and a crash course in property law that I never wanted. After the surreal pool invasion, I spent Saturday evening researching property laws and neighborhood regulations. My deed was crystal clear. The house, yard, and pool were exclusively mine, with no easements or shared access agreements. The homeowner's insurance policy specifically covered a private single-family residential pool with liability that would be voided by unauthorized public use. I even called Richard Williamson, the previous owner, who was baffled by Karen's claim. We never allowed neighborhood pool access, he confirmed. That's completely fabricated. We had friends over occasionally, but there was certainly no schedule or standing arrangement. Armed with facts, I installed a combination lock on the gate Sunday morning. By afternoon, I was enjoying my coffee when the doorbell rang insistently. Multiple presses in quick succession. Karen stood on my porch with her children plus 3 more I hadn't seen before. Behind them, 2 other adults waited on the sidewalk beside a cooler and beach bags. We're here for pool time, she announced, as if yesterday's conversation had never happened. Your gate seems to be locked. Yes, I locked it because this is my private property, I replied, blocking my doorway. As I explained yesterday, there is no neighborhood pool arrangement. I spoke with the Williamsons directly, and they confirmed they never allowed scheduled access. Karen's expression tightened, but she quickly recovered. You must have spoken to the wrong Williamsons. I'm talking about David and Sarah Williamson, who owned this house for 12 years. Those are exactly who I called. They owned the house before me, and they said there was never any arrangement. The other adults exchanged uncomfortable glances, but Karen pressed on, undeterred. Look, maybe they didn't explain it to you properly during the sale, but this pool has always been partially neighborhood funded. Excuse me? I couldn't hide my disbelief. When the pool was installed 15 years ago, several neighbors contributed to the construction costs with the understanding it would be available for community use on a schedule. She delivered this fiction with absolute conviction. That's impossible. The pool was built 23 years ago by the original homeowners. The Williamsons bought it with the pool already installed. I'd seen the permits during my home purchase. Karen waved dismissively. The point is, there's a long-standing agreement that you're now violating. We've planned our whole weekend around pool access. One of the other adults stepped forward, looking uncomfortable. Karen, you told us this was a neighborhood pool with an established arrangement. It is, she insisted. This neighbor is new and doesn't understand community traditions. I've lived here for 2 years, I corrected. You moved in 6 months ago, according to what you said yesterday. The second adult checked his watch. Maybe we should just go to the public pool. That's a 15-minute drive and it's always crowded, Karen snapped before turning back to me. Look, all these children are hot and disappointed. Are you really going to be the mean neighbor who ruins their Sunday? The emotional manipulation was as transparent as it was effective. The children were indeed looking up with disappointed expressions. I sympathize, but this is my private property. I'm not comfortable with strangers using my pool, especially given the liability issues. We're hardly strangers. We're neighbors, Karen insisted. And like I said, we've all signed liability waivers. What? Waivers? With whom? There's no HOA here, no pool committee. Who exactly do you think has the authority to grant pool access on my property? Karen's story shifted again. The neighborhood association, of course. There is no neighborhood association. This isn't a planned community or subdivision with common areas. These are individual properties with individual owners. The other adults were now backing toward the street, clearly recognizing the situation. Karen, you told us this was all arranged, one murmured. This is awkward. Karen ignored them, leaning closer to me. Listen, I've already told everyone in my social circle about the lovely neighborhood with pool access. I've invited friends over specifically for pool playdates this summer. You're making me look bad. And there it was, the real issue. Karen had made promises based on a complete fiction, and now she was desperate to avoid embarrassment. I'm sorry if you've misunderstood something or been misinformed, I said firmly, but that doesn't change reality. This is my private pool and I don't consent to neighborhood use. This is ridiculous, she huffed. I'm going to speak to other neighbors about this. You'll be hearing from people who've lived here much longer than you. Please do talk to other neighbors, I encouraged. They'll confirm there's no shared pool arrangement, never has been. Karen gathered her disappointed entourage and marched away, already on her phone. I closed the door with a mixture of irritation and disbelief. That evening, I received texts from 2 neighbors warning me that Karen was going door to door asking about restoring pool access rights. Both assured me they had set her straight about property boundaries. I reinforced the gate lock, installed a no trespassing sign, and wondered if this would be the end of it. It wasn't. Monday after work, I discovered my new lock had been cut clean through, the severed pieces lying on the ground beside my now open gate. The invasion had escalated from entitled to criminal. Tuesday evening, I pulled into my driveway after a grueling 9-hour shift to find my backyard transformed into what looked like a full-scale neighborhood pool party. At least 10 adults and a dozen children filled my pool and patio. Music blared from a portable speaker. Someone, presumably Karen, had wheeled my grill out and was cooking hamburgers. My patio furniture had been rearranged to accommodate coolers, towels, and pool toys I'd never seen before. For a moment, I sat in my car, stunned by the sheer audacity. Then fury propelled me forward. As I stormed through my own gate, Karen spotted me and raised a plastic cup in greeting, as if welcoming me to her gathering. "There's the homeowner now," she called cheerfully. "We saved you a burger." Several guests turned with friendly waves that died mid-air when they saw my expression. "Everyone needs to leave immediately," I announced, loud enough to be heard over the music. "This is private property and none of you have permission to be here." Karen sighed dramatically, approaching with the confident stride of someone on their own territory. "Don't be like this," she said, voice lowered. "Everyone's having a good time. There's plenty of pool for all of us." "This isn't about pool space. This is about trespassing. You cut my lock. That's destruction of property and breaking and entering." Karen shrugged. The lock was clearly defective. It practically fell apart. A middle-aged man in swim trunks approached hesitantly. "Is there a problem?" Karen said this was a neighborhood pool that everyone's allowed to use. "This is my private residence," I replied firmly. "There is no neighborhood pool arrangement, and Karen knows that because I've told her twice already. She cut my lock to enter illegally." The man's eyes widened. "We were told this was a community event that you had approved." "Well, I didn't. And now I'm asking everyone to leave before I call the police for trespassing." Several guests immediately began gathering their belongings, murmuring apologies. Others looked to Karen for guidance, clearly confused by the conflicting information. Karen's response was to raise her voice. "Everyone relax. This is just a misunderstanding. There's been a pool-sharing arrangement in this neighborhood for years." She turned to me, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I understand you're new here and maybe don't appreciate our community traditions, but there's no need to be selfish about a pool you can't possibly use all by yourself." "I've lived here for 2 years," I corrected, "and there has never been any pool-sharing arrangement. The previous owners confirmed this themselves. The Williamsons absolutely allowed neighborhood access. I have witnesses," Karen insisted. Though notably, no one stepped forward to support this claim. A woman collecting her children's toys leaned toward me. "I'm so sorry. We genuinely thought this was authorized. Karen said she'd spoken with you." "She never did," I confirmed, "and my cut lock proves this was intentional trespassing." Karen stepped between us. "Don't listen to the pool hoarder. Why should one person monopolize a resource that could benefit so many families during this heat wave? Think of the children." As if on cue, several children began loudly complaining about having to leave. Karen gave me a smug look, as if their disappointment was a winning argument. I took out my phone. "I'm calling the police now. Anyone who doesn't want to explain trespassing to officers should leave immediately. Most of the adults hurriedly gathered. Their things, ushering protesting children toward the gate. Several apologized as they left, clearly embarrassed by the situation. Within minutes, only Karen, her children, and 2 other adults, apparently friends rather than random neighbors, remained. "This is absolutely ridiculous," Karen declared, making no move to leave. "You're causing a scene over nothing." "Over nothing? You cut my lock, entered my property without permission, used my grill, moved my furniture, and invited strangers into my backyard. That's not nothing. We're using a pool that sits empty most of the day. It's wasteful." "It's private property," I countered, dialing 911. "Go ahead and call," Karen scoffed. "The police have better things to do than referee petty neighborhood disputes." As I reported the trespassing, Karen made a show of slowly gathering her things, periodically rolling her eyes or making exaggerated gestures of disbelief for her remaining audience. Her children splashed deliberately, soaking my phone while Karen pretended not to notice. "Officers will be here shortly," I announced after ending the call. "Anyone still on my property when they arrive will be formally reported for trespassing." "This neighborhood used to be friendly before people like you moved in," Karen spat, finally moving toward the gate. "You're destroying community values with your selfishness." "Breaking into someone's property isn't a community value." "We didn't break in. The gate was unlocked when we arrived," she claimed, contradicting her earlier statement about the defective lock. "So the lock cut itself in half?" I pointed to the severed pieces still lying on the ground. Karen ignored this evidence, instead addressing her remaining friends. "Can you believe this? All I wanted was for the children to enjoy a nice afternoon." One friend looked decidedly uncomfortable. "Karen, maybe we should discuss this another time." "Fine," she huffed, "but this isn't over. Not by a long shot." As they finally exited, Karen turned back. "You know, it would have been so easy to just share. Now you've made an enemy of half the neighborhood. By defending my own property, I doubt that." "You'll see," she called over her shoulder. "People around here stick together against selfish neighbors." As they disappeared down the street, I surveyed the damage. Food wrappers littered the patio. Someone had spilled what smelled like wine on a cushion. The pool water level was noticeably lower, and the chemical balance would certainly need adjustment after so many people. I was still cleaning when the police arrived 15 minutes later. Though the trespassers were gone, I filed a report about the cut lock and unauthorized entry, showing the officer my property deed and the remains of the lock. "Document everything," the officer advised. "Take photos of any damage. If she returns after this warning, we can pursue more serious charges." As his patrol car pulled away, I noticed Karen watching from down the street, phone in hand, apparently photographing the police presence. This, I realized, was just the beginning of what was clearly becoming a neighborhood war, one I never wanted, but now couldn't avoid. Peace lasted exactly 2 days before Karen's next offensive. Thursday afternoon, I arrived home to find my driveway blocked by unfamiliar vehicles. From inside my house came the unmistakable sounds of splashing and laughter. Somehow they had gotten in again. This time I didn't hesitate. I called the police immediately, then approached my backyard with phone recording. The scene was even, more outrageous than before. At least 15 people occupied my pool area, including several faces I recognized from Tuesday's confrontation. Patio furniture had been rearranged into a party layout, and someone had hooked a portable speaker to my outdoor outlets. Karen sat in my favorite lounge chair, sunglasses on, drink in hand, holding court like the queen of my backyard. "This is private property," I announced loudly, continuing to record. "Everyone here is trespassing. The police have been called and are on their way." Karen barely glanced up. "There he is, right on cue with the empty threats." "They're not threats. Officers are already en route." A man I hadn't seen before approached me. "Look, we're just trying to enjoy the afternoon. Karen said this pool access issue had been resolved with you." "There's no issue to resolve. This is my private property, not a public pool. Karen has no right to invite anyone here, and she knows it." Karen sighed dramatically, addressing the gathering. "See what I mean? Total overreaction. My attorney says adverse possession clearly applies since the neighborhood has been using this pool for years." "That's completely false," I countered. And even if neighbors had used this pool before, which they didn't, adverse possession requires continuous use for 20 years in this state. Karen waved dismissively. Let's not bore everyone with legal technicalities. Sirens in the distance silenced further argument. Within minutes, 2 police cruisers pulled up, and Officer Rodriguez, who had taken my report 2 days earlier, approached with his partner. Karen immediately rushed to intercept them, somehow reaching the officers before I could. "Thank goodness you're here," she gushed. "We've been trying to resolve this neighborhood dispute reasonably, but he's becoming increasingly hostile." Officer Rodriguez looked past her to where I stood. "Mr. Jordan, we meet again." "Yes, officer. As you can see, the trespassing has continued despite your warning." Karen cut in quickly. "Officer, this is a civil matter regarding established neighborhood pool access that's been in place for decades. Police involvement is really unnecessary." "Ma'am, I need to speak with the property owner first," Rodriguez replied firmly. "Please, step aside." Karen's smile faltered slightly, but she persisted. "Actually, that's what we're trying to establish. My attorney has advised me that communal use establishes certain rights that—" "Ma'am," Rodriguez interrupted, "I need to see identification from both parties, and I need to understand whose property we're standing on according to county records. I provided my driver's license and property deed, which I'd started keeping handy." Karen reluctantly showed her ID, revealing an address over 6 blocks away. Hardly a next-door neighbor with legitimate pool access concerns, Rodriguez examined the documents and surveyed the crowded pool area. According to county records, this is private residential property belonging solely to Mr. Jordan. There are no easements or shared access agreements on file. Records don't always reflect long-standing community arrangements, Karen argued. The Williamsons allowed neighborhood pool use for years. Ask anyone who's lived here more than 5 minutes. As if on cue, my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Castillo, called from over the fence. "That's not true. I've lived here 30 years, and the pool has always been private. The Williamsons never had pool parties for the neighborhood." Karen's face flushed. "With all due respect, perhaps you weren't included in those gatherings." Mrs. Castillo bristled visibly at the implication. "Young lady, nothing happens on this street without my knowledge. No one has ever used this pool except the homeowners and their invited guests." Officer Rodriguez turned back to Karen. "Ma'am, regardless of what you believe about past arrangements, the current owner has not granted permission for you to be here. That makes this trespassing, plain and simple." "This is absurd," Karen huffed. "There are children present. Are you going to tell children they can't swim during a heat wave?" "The presence of children doesn't override property laws," Rodriguez replied evenly. "Now I'm going to ask everyone who doesn't live at this address to gather their belongings and leave immediately." Karen crossed her arms. "And if we refuse? Are you going to arrest a pool full of families for enjoying a community resource?" "If necessary, yes. Trespassing is a criminal offense. Everyone here has exactly 5 minutes to exit the property before we begin formal proceedings." The effect was immediate. Most guests hurriedly gathered their belongings, apologizing as they left. Several cast reproachful glances at Karen, clearly realizing they'd been misled. Karen remained defiant. "This isn't over. My attorney will be contacting you about harassment and discriminatory enforcement." "Your attorney can contact the department," Rodriguez replied professionally, "but right now you need to leave or face arrest for criminal trespassing." Finally, recognizing her position was untenable, Karen gathered her things with deliberate slowness, making a show of checking her watch and sighing dramatically. As she passed me at the gate, she lowered her voice. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. This neighborhood was peaceful before you decided to make an issue of sharing. The only issue is your continued trespassing," I replied calmly. Officer Rodriguez overheard the exchange. "Ma'am, that could be construed as a threat. I suggest you leave without further comment." As Karen finally departed, Rodriguez turned to me. "Based on the repeated nature of these incidents, I recommend filing for a restraining order. Document everything: photos, videos, witness statements." I nodded, watching Karen's retreating figure as she spoke animatedly into her phone. "Will this be the end of it?" I asked. "Based on my experience," Rodriguez replied, "people this entitled rarely give up easily. Stay vigilant, His warning proved prophetic. The next morning, my phone exploded with notifications. Karen had taken her campaign digital, and my neighborhood reputation was her new target. My phone had been buzzing non-stop since 6 a.m. with texts from neighbors I barely knew. Just saw other Facebook post, is everything okay? And didn't realize you were having issues with the neighborhood kids. Confused, I opened the local community group to find Karen's masterpiece of manipulation. Neighborhood alert. Local resident denies children pool access during record heatwave, read the dramatic headline above a photo of my house, clearly taken from the street without permission. The lengthy post beneath painted me as a villain, hoarding a precious resource while children suffered in the summer heat. Despite decades of community pool sharing at this address, Karen wrote, the current resident has chosen to end this beloved neighborhood tradition, going so far as to call armed police officers to threaten families and children yesterday. With public pools overcrowded and many families unable to afford alternatives, this decision has left neighborhood children with no safe place to cool off during dangerous heat. The comments section had exploded overnight. This is outrageous. Who calls cops on kids swimming? I remember the Williamsons always welcomed neighbors. Maybe we should start a petition. A handful of voices attempted reason. Isn't this a private residence? But they were quickly drowned out by indignation, fueled by Karen's carefully crafted narrative. My doorbell rang just as I finished reading. Through the peephole, I spotted Mrs. Castillo, my elderly neighbor, who had defended me yesterday. I assume you've seen that woman's ridiculous post? She asked when I opened the door. Pure fiction. I've already commented, setting the record straight. But you should know she's been going door to door with some kind of petition. A petition about my pool? I asked incredulously. Claims she's gathering signatures to restore historic community pool access. Most neighbors know better, but newcomers might believe her nonsense. Sure enough, when I checked my mailbox later, I found a professionally printed flyer. Community. Meeting. Restoring neighborhood pool access. Saturday 2 p.m. at Maple Street Park. The flyer included the same photo of my house and language about reinstating traditional access rights. The smear campaign escalated throughout the day. When I stopped for coffee at the local shop, the barista gave me a curious look. Aren't you the pool guy? From the Facebook group? At the grocery store, I overheard two women discussing that selfish new resident who closed the neighborhood pool. Even my mail carrier mentioned hearing about some pool drama on my street. Karen had transformed a straightforward trespassing issue into community controversy with remarkable efficiency. That evening, I met with my immediate neighbors, the Patels to the left, the Garcias to the right, and Mrs. Castillo across the street, to clarify the situation. We gathered on the Patel's deck, where I explained the full sequence of events. We've lived here 12 years, Mr. Patel said, and there has never been shared pool access on this street. We invited friends over sometimes, as I'm sure the Williamsons did, but that's normal hospitality, not an open-door policy. Mrs. Garcia nodded. Karen approached Roberto last week claiming there was a neighborhood pool schedule. He told her that was absurd, but she insisted it was tradition. She's tried. This before, Mrs. Castillo added. When the Morgans lived on Elm Street, she attempted to claim their hot tub had community evening access hours. Pure invention. Has anyone actually verified how long Karen's lived here? I asked. The neighbors exchanged glances. She bought the Reynolds place in January, Mr. Garcia confirmed, barely 6 months ago. Yet she claims intimate knowledge of decades-old neighborhood traditions, Mrs. Castillo snorted. That woman creates traditions that serve her purposes. Last Christmas, she tried to organize mandatory neighborhood holiday decorating standards. When no one complied, she sent anonymous notes about disappointing community participation. As we talked, a more complete picture emerged. Karen had established a pattern of entitled behavior throughout the neighborhood, attempting to dictate yard maintenance standards, complaining about children playing too loudly, even reporting trivial code violations to the city. My pool was simply her latest target. She specifically bought a house without a pool, Mr. Patel noted, then immediately began scouting for access to someone else's. Armed with this context, I began my counter-campaign. First, I contacted the previous owners again, and the Williamsons provided a signed statement confirming they never allowed neighborhood pool access. Then I researched property laws, confirming that allowing unauthorized access could invalidate my insurance coverage and create significant liability. Next, I installed additional security cameras covering all approaches to my property and documented everything in a detailed timeline. Finally, I consulted with a lawyer friend about potential harassment or defamation issues. "She's skating right along the edge," my friend advised after reviewing the social media posts. "Implying traditions that never existed isn't technically defamation, but organizing. Trespassing certainly constitutes harassment. Keep documenting everything." On Friday morning, my doorbell rang again. This time it was my supervisor from work. "Got a minute?" she asked awkwardly. "I received a concerning call yesterday from someone claiming to be a neighborhood representative. She suggested you've been involved in some kind of discriminatory behavior regarding community property." I invited her in and explained the situation, showing her the police reports and property documentation. "I thought it sounded suspicious," she said, relieved. "But Karen Mitchell, I think that was her name, was very convincing about representing some neighborhood association." "There is no neighborhood association," I confirmed. "She made that up, just like she made up the community pool access." After my supervisor left, I sat on my patio reviewing Karen's escalating pattern. What had begun as entitled trespassing had evolved into a calculated campaign to pressure me through community opinion. The fact that she'd contacted my workplace crossed yet another line. I made two decisions that afternoon. First, I would attend her community meeting tomorrow to address her claims directly. Second, I would file for the restraining order officer Rodriguez had recommended. Just as I reached these conclusions, my phone chimed with yet another notification. Karen had updated her post. Update. Community meeting moved to directly outside problem residents to peacefully demonstrate our concerns. Bring your children, towels, and pool toys to show solidarity. She wasn't just gathering signatures anymore. Karen was organizing a protest at my house with children as props. The smear campaign had just become a direct confrontation, and it was scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. Saturday morning arrived with blessed quiet. After a week of confrontations, trespassing, and social media drama, I was grateful for a few hours of peace before Karen's scheduled demonstration. I spent the morning reinforcing my fence gate with a heavy-duty padlock and installing additional security cameras, precautions that now felt necessary rather than paranoid. Just after noon, as I was reviewing the restraining order paperwork I planned to file on Monday, a county vehicle pulled into my driveway. A middle-aged man in a polo, shirt embroidered with county building inspector, approached my door. "Good afternoon," he said, consulting his clipboard. "I'm Thomas Jenkins from the County Building and Safety Department. We received an urgent report about an unpermitted and potentially hazardous pool installation at this address." "Unpermitted?" I echoed in disbelief. "This pool has been here for over 20 years. The complaint specifically mentions recent modifications made without proper permits or inspections," he explained. "Something about expanded decking and altered drainage systems installed within the past month." I immediately understood. "Let me guess, was this complaint filed by Karen Matthews?" Jenkins glanced at his paperwork. "I'm not at liberty to disclose who filed the report, but given your response, I'm guessing there might be some context I should know about?" "There absolutely is," I sighed. "I'd be happy to show you the pool and explain the situation." I led him to the backyard, where the pool sat exactly as it had since I purchased the house. No recent modifications, no expanded decking, no altered drainage. Just a standard in-ground pool with the original concrete surround. As you can see, nothing has changed recently. I have all the original inspection documentation from when I bought the house 2 years ago, including the pool certification. Jenkins began a thorough inspection anyway, measuring setbacks and examining the filtration system. As he worked, I explained the ongoing situation with Karen, including the trespassing incidents and police reports. His professional demeanor gradually relaxed. "Between us, this isn't the first time I've been sent on a wild goose chase by a neighborhood dispute. The description in this complaint doesn't match what I'm seeing at all." He reviewed my property documentation and the original pool permits from decades ago. Everything was in order. Your pool is fully compliant, properly permitted, and clearly hasn't been modified as claimed, he concluded, making notes on his clipboard. Shall file my report indicating this was an unfounded complaint. Could there be consequences for filing a false report? I asked. The department typically issues a warning first, but multiple unfounded complaints can result in fines for misuse of county resources. He hesitated, then added, just to be safe, I'd keep these documents easily accessible. Given what you've told me, I wouldn't be surprised if other inspectors show up on similarly dubious pretexts. His prediction proved accurate almost immediately. Jenkins had barely pulled away when another vehicle arrived, this time a representative from the health department responding to complaints about unsanitary conditions and contaminated water in a community pool operating without proper licensing. Once again, I explained the situation, showed my documentation, and allowed a thorough inspection that revealed nothing but a properly maintained private pool. Your chemical levels are actually perfect, the health inspector noted, reviewing her test results. Better than most public pools I inspect. Because it's a private pool used by exactly one person, me, I explained. She nodded sympathetically. For what it's worth, there's nothing in our regulations that would classify this as anything but a private residential pool. The complaint describing it as an unlicensed community facility was fundamentally mischaracterizing the situation. By mid-afternoon, I had accumulated a collection of official inspection reports, all confirming the same thing. My pool was private, properly permitted, well-maintained, and fully compliant with all regulations. I carefully filed each document, increasingly grateful for the paper trail Karen was inadvertently helping me create. The scheduled protest time approached, and I braced for Karen's next move. From my front window, I watched as cars began parking along my street. Karen arrived first, directing people like a traffic controller and distributing what appeared to be pre-made signs. Just as the group began to organize on the sidewalk, a familiar county vehicle pulled up. Thomas Jenkins had returned, this time with a supervisor. I met them in the driveway. Another complaint already. Jenkins looked embarrassed. I'm afraid so. After I filed my report, someone called my supervisor claiming I had been biased and incomplete in my inspection. They insisted there were unpermitted structures I had failed to document. His supervisor, a stern woman with grey hair, introduced herself. I'm here to verify the initial inspection findings, standard procedure when a complaint escalation occurs. They conducted another thorough inspection while Karen's protest group grew on the sidewalk. I could see her watching the county officials with obvious concern, repeatedly checking her phone as if waiting for something. Everything appears to be in order, exactly as Inspector Jenkins reported, the supervisor finally concluded. The complaint referenced structures that simply don't exist on this property. As they prepared to leave, I noticed Karen approaching rapidly, protest temporarily abandoned. Excuse me, she called. Are you from the building department? I'm the one who filed the complaint. You need to check the pool house structure. The supervisor turned calmly. Ma'am, there is no pool house structure on this property. Of course there is. Behind the fence next to the pool, it was built without permits. We've conducted a complete property inspection, the supervisor replied firmly. There is a standard pool equipment enclosure that was included in the original. Permits but no pool house. Karen's confidence faltered momentarily before she rallied. Well, you obviously didn't look carefully enough. I can show you exactly where— Ma'am, are you the property owner? The supervisor interrupted. No, but I'm a concerned neighbor. Then you have no authority to access this property or direct our inspection. We've completed our assessment and found all structures properly permitted. This is outrageous, Karen sputtered. I demand to speak with your manager. The supervisor handed her a business card. You're welcome to file a formal complaint with the department. However, I should inform you that filing multiple false reports constitutes misuse of county resources and can result in fines. As the county officials departed, Karen turned her frustration toward me. You think you're so clever, she hissed. This isn't over, not even close. Actually, Karen, I think it is, I replied calmly. You've tried trespassing, social media manipulation, and now false reports to county officials. None of it changes the basic fact. This is my private property, not a community pool. We'll see about that, she snapped, returning to her waiting group. From my driveway, I could hear her reframing the situation to her followers. The county inspection was now part of her narrative, evidence of ongoing investigations into my property. As I watched her energize the small crowd with entirely fictional claims, I realized that no amount of official documentation or legal boundaries would deter someone so committed to her alternative reality. Karen didn't just want access to a pool. She wanted to be right, to be in control, to bend the neighborhood to her vision, regardless of facts or property rights. Monday's restraining order couldn't come soon enough. Sunday morning brought unexpected quiet. Karen's protest had fizzled after the county inspector's visit, leaving her with too few supporters to create the dramatic confrontation she'd clearly envisioned. I spent the day documenting everything from the previous week, organizing my growing file of evidence for Monday's restraining order application. Monday arrived with a new twist, an official-looking envelope in my mailbox marked Urgent HOA Violation Notice. Inside was a letter on impressive letterhead. Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association Notice of Violation. Pool maintenance and access, dear resident. It has come to the board's attention that you are in violation of Community Covenant Section 8.3 regarding shared amenities maintenance and access. Your property at 1423 Oakwood Drive contains a designated community access pool that must be maintained according to association standards and made available during scheduled hours, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and weekends from 1 to 5 p.m. Failure to comply will result in fines of $100 a day and possible liens against your property. Please respond within 48 hours to arrange compliance inspection. Sincerely, Karen Matthews, Interim HOA President. I stared at the document, momentarily stunned by its audacity, before reality reasserted itself. There was one critical problem with this official notice. Our neighborhood didn't have an HOA. Never had. A quick search confirmed what I already knew. Oakwood Estates had no homeowners association, no community covenants, and certainly no shared amenities regulations. The impressive letterhead, threatening language, and official tone were completely fabricated. I immediately called Thomas Jenkins at the county building department. I'm not surprised, he sighed after I described the fake HOA notice. This is actually a criminal offense, impersonating a regulatory body to exert control over someone's property. You should report this to the police immediately. Before calling the police, I decided to check whether any neighbors had received similar notices. Mrs. Castillo answered my knock with a knowing look. Let me guess, you got one of Karen's ridiculous HOA letters too. You received one? I asked. About my non-compliant front garden. Apparently my award-winning roses violate some imaginary landscaping covenant. She shook her head. The woman is delusional. I've lived here 30 years. There has never been an HOA. As we compared our fake violation notices, Mr. Patel joined us from next door. She left this on my door this morning, he said, holding an identical envelope. Claims my basketball hoop violates community standards. By noon, I'd discovered Karen had distributed similar notices to at least 8 households, each citing different imaginary violations of non-existent regulations. Most neighbors recognized the fraud immediately, but several newer residents had been genuinely concerned. She came by last month trying to collect HOA dues, reported a young couple who'd moved in recently. When we asked for documentation, she said the paperwork would come with our first newsletter. A disturbing pattern emerged as more neighbors shared experiences. For months, Karen had been systematically laying groundwork, mentioning board meetings, discussing community guidelines, and generally creating the impression of an HOA infrastructure that didn't exist. She tried to start a real HOA back in March, Mr. Garcia informed me, went door to door with membership forms, but couldn't get even close to the required percentage of homeowners to sign on. Instead of accepting defeat, she apparently decided to just pretend it exists anyway. I reported everything to Officer Rodriguez, who took copies of the fraudulent notices for the growing police file. This crosses into criminal impersonation and attempted fraud, he confirmed, especially since she's apparently tried to collect money under false pretenses. That afternoon I filed the restraining order application, now significantly strengthened by the fraudulent HOA notices. On my attorney's advice, I also sent a formal cease and desist letter to Karen by certified mail, specifically addressing the false HOA claims. Karen's response came swiftly, but not directly to me. By evening she had called the county health department with claims of unsanitary conditions, potentially creating a public health emergency. This triggered an unscheduled pool inspection at 5:30 p.m. The inspector arrived looking tired and skeptical. I was about to end my shift when this emergency report came in, she explained. Something about contaminated water potentially affecting neighborhood children. I showed her the police reports documenting Karen's ongoing harassment, along with the fraudulent HOA notice. This pool water was tested just 3 days ago and found to be perfect, I reminded her. She conducted the required testing anyway, confirming once again that my pool maintenance was impeccable. Before leaving, she added a note to my file. Repeated unfounded complaints appear to be harassment. Recommend review before responding to future reports from same source. As darkness fell, I noticed unfamiliar cars driving slowly past my house, occasionally stopping as occupants peered toward my backyard. Checking social media, I discovered why. Karen had posted in multiple community groups claiming the county health department had confirmed dangerous conditions at my address and advised neighbors to document suspected violations. The fabrications were escalating faster than I could counter them. Karen had transformed from annoying trespasser to something more concerning. Someone willing to forge documents, impersonate officials, and potentially commit fraud, all to maintain her fictional narrative of entitlement to my property. What began as a dispute over pool access had evolved into something that required more than just a restraining order. Karen's actions were now attracting attention beyond our neighborhood, including from law enforcement officials who were beginning to view her behavior as criminal rather than merely annoying. Tuesday morning, I met with my attorney to review the restraining order application and growing evidence file. The fraudulent HOA notices had strengthened our case considerably. This is no longer just a nuisance neighbor dispute, she explained, impersonating an official organization, attempting to impose fines, and creating false documentation crosses into criminal territory. The judge will see that. The hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning. Just 2 more days of vigilance before legal protections would be in place. I returned home cautiously optimistic, only to find Karen standing in my driveway with a man in a business suit. Both held clipboards and were taking photos of my house. "Excuse me," I called as I parked. "This is private property." Karen smiled with artificial sweetness. "We're just conducting the HOA inspection I mentioned in the notice. This is Walter Evans, our compliance officer." The man extended his hand. "Nice to meet you. We won't take much of your time." I didn't shake his hand. "There is no HOA in this neighborhood. Any notice you received was fraudulent, and you are both trespassing." Evans looked confused. "Ms. Matthews chairs the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association. She hired me to conduct official inspections." "She can't chair an organization that doesn't exist," I explained, turning to Karen. "You know there's no HOA here. You tried to create one in March and failed to get sufficient support." "That's completely false," Karen replied smoothly. "The association has existed since the neighborhood was developed. Ask any original resident." I have asked. They've all confirmed there has never been an HOA here. Evans glanced between us, clearly sensing something was wrong. "Perhaps I should see the official HOA registration documents. I'll email those to you later," Karen said quickly. "Right now, we need to complete this inspection before the board meeting." "There are no registration documents because there is no HOA," I stated firmly. "Ms. Matthews has been distributing fraudulent violation notices throughout the neighborhood, impersonating a non-existent authority. The police have been notified." Evans took a step back. "I was contracted to perform inspections for a legally established homeowners association." "You were misled," I told him, pulling out my phone. "I'm calling the police to report trespassing." Again, Karen's facade cracked. "This is ridiculous. I'm trying to maintain community standards that everyone agreed to. No one agreed to anything because there is no HOA, I repeated. Please leave my property immediately. Evans was already retreating to his car. Ms. Matthews, I'll need to verify the association's legal standing before proceeding further. Left alone with Karen, I expected another heated confrontation. Instead, she lowered her voice to a menacing whisper. You're making a serious mistake. I have connections at City Hall that could make your life very difficult. Are you threatening me? I'm stating facts. You've embarrassed me in front of my consultant. There will be consequences. As she stormed off, I called Officer Rodriguez to report the incident, increasingly concerned about Karen's escalating behavior. He arrived 30 minutes later. We're building a substantial case, he assured me after taking my statement. The fraudulent HOA impersonation is being taken very seriously. She's becoming more aggressive, not less, I noted. Every time she's confronted with reality, she doubles down. That's unfortunately common in these situations. The restraining order will help but document everything until then. For the rest of Tuesday and most of Wednesday, Karen was unusually quiet. No social media posts, no inspectors, no protesters. I hoped she had finally recognized the legal jeopardy her actions had created, but experience left me skeptical. Wednesday. Evening, returning from dinner with friends, I discovered why Karen had been so quiet. She'd been planning her most audacious move yet. As I turned onto my street, I saw flashing lights and a crowd gathered near my house. Drawing closer, I identified police cars, an animal control vehicle, and at least a dozen neighbors standing behind yellow caution tape that stretched across my front yard. Officer Peterson, not Rodriguez, approached as I parked. Sir, we need to verify your identity before you approach the property. What's happening? This is my house. We received multiple reports of animal abuse and neglect at this address, specifically alleged mistreatment of an exotic pet. Exotic. Pet? I don't have any pets at all. After checking my ID, Peterson led me toward my house. Someone called claiming there was an illegally owned python being kept in dangerous conditions. The complaint included photos allegedly showing the snake in your backyard. That's completely fabricated, I said, stunned by this new level of deception. We're beginning to realize that, Peterson admitted. Animal control found no evidence of any animals on the property. However, the calls seemed credible enough to warrant investigation, multiple concerned citizens reporting the same details. As we neared the gathered crowd, I spotted Karen standing prominently in front, phone raised to record my reaction. There he is, she called out. Ask him about the python. Several neighbors looked embarrassed upon seeing me, clearly realizing they'd been manipulated into another of Karen's fabricated crises. The animal control officer approached with an apologetic expression. Sir, we conducted a thorough search with the police department's permission due to the nature of the reports. We found no animals or evidence of animals on your property. Because I don't have any pets, I confirmed. This entire situation was fabricated by that woman, I pointed to Karen, who has been harassing me for weeks over access to my pool. That's absurd, Karen projected her voice for the audience. Multiple people saw the snake. He's obviously hidden it. I turned to Officer Peterson. This is part of an ongoing harassment campaign. Officer Rodriguez has the file. I'm filing for a restraining order tomorrow morning. Peterson nodded. We'll add this incident to the report. Ms. Matthews, we need to discuss the matter of filing false reports. As he approached Karen, she suddenly switched tactics. I saw it with my own eyes, a huge snake right there by the pool. He's endangering the neighborhood children. Ma'am, animal control has found no evidence of any reptile on the premises, because he moved it, probably when he saw the police cars. She was growing increasingly agitated, her performance now bordering on hysteria. Peterson remained calm. Filing false reports is a serious offense. If you continue making unfounded claims, they're not false. Karen shouted, abandoning all pretense of composure. He's been threatening the neighborhood for weeks, hoarding the community pool, ignoring HOA regulations, endangering children. Someone has to stand up to him. The gathered neighbors began dispersing. uncomfortable with her escalating behavior. Even her usual supporters were backing away, recognizing the situation had spiraled beyond reasonable neighborhood concerns. "Ms. Matthews," Peterson said firmly, "I need you to calm down and speak with me privately." Instead, Karen marched directly toward me, phone still recording. "Admit it. Tell everyone how you've been breaking community rules since you moved here." Officers quickly stepped between us as Karen continued her tirade, now incorporating every previous false claim into an incoherent narrative about snakes, pool chemicals, and HOA violations. "Ma'am, step back immediately," Peterson ordered. When Karen ignored the command, continuing to advance while shouting accusations, Peterson had no choice. "Ms. Matthews, you're under arrest for disorderly conduct and filing false reports." As they led Karen to the police car, her facade completely shattered. "This isn't fair. I'm trying to protect the neighborhood. He's the one who should be arrested." The gathering completely dispersed as Karen was placed in the police car, still shouting about pythons and pool access. Neighbors avoided eye contact as they hurried home, embarrassed by their participation in what they now recognized as manufactured drama. Standing in my driveway, watching the police car drive away with Karen in the back seat, I felt no satisfaction. Only relief that her escalating behavior had finally reached its breaking point before someone got hurt. The temporary peace felt fragile. Tomorrow's restraining order hearing suddenly seemed even more crucial. News of Karen's arrest spread through the neighborhood with remarkable speed. By Thursday morning, my phone was filled with messages, some expressing support, others offering eyewitness accounts of her meltdown, and several containing apologies from neighbors who had initially believed her claims. The restraining order hearing went smoothly. The judge reviewed my extensive documentation, including police reports, falsified HOA notices, and statements from multiple neighbors. "This is one of the more clear-cut cases I've seen," she commented. "The pattern of escalating harassment is well documented and concerning." The temporary restraining order was granted immediately, prohibiting Karen from coming within 100 feet of me, my property, or my workplace for the next 30 days, after which a hearing for a permanent order would be held. Given the criminal charges she now faced for filing false reports, disorderly conduct, and impersonating an official organization, her ability to continue the harassment seemed finally curtailed. When I returned home that afternoon, I found a handwritten note in my mailbox from Mrs. Castillo. "Emergency neighborhood meeting tonight, 7 p.m. at my house. Please come." Similar notes had apparently been distributed throughout the neighborhood. At 7, I walked across the street to find Mrs. Castillo's living room already filled with neighbors, some familiar faces, others I'd only seen in passing. Before the pool conflict began, the atmosphere was somber and slightly uncomfortable, with quiet conversations stopping as I entered. "Thank you for coming," Mrs. Castillo said, guiding me to a seat. "I think we all need to address what's happened and how we move forward as a community." Mr. Garcia stood, clearing his throat. "First, I think we owe you an apology. Many of us didn't speak up quickly enough when Karen began spreading misinformation. Some even repeated her claims without verification." Several heads nodded in agreement. "I believed her about the HOA," admitted a young woman I recognized as a recent move-in. "She seemed so official, with letterhead and everything. I even wrote a check for dues before my husband researched and discovered there was no association." This revelation prompted others to share similar experiences. Karen had collected money for non-existent community events, created fake property regulations, and appointed herself to imaginary committees with authority over her neighbors' properties. "It wasn't just the pool," Mr. Patel noted. "She's been attempting to control the neighborhood since she arrived. The pool was simply her most aggressive target." As more neighbors shared their experiences, a troubling pattern emerged. Karen had systematically targeted newer residents unfamiliar with neighborhood history, creating elaborate fictions designed to establish herself as an authority figure. When challenged, she would either produce falsified documentation or claim the challenger was violating community standards. She threatened to report my mobility ramp as non-compliant, revealed an elderly gentleman I'd never met, said it violated aesthetic guidelines that don't exist. The most disturbing stories came from families with children Karen had apparently been particularly aggressive about recruiting their kids as unwitting props in her schemes, organizing community pool days and then blaming me when the events couldn't proceed. She told my children the mean neighbor was keeping them from swimming during the heat wave, one mother admitted shamefacedly. I should have questioned that narrative instead of initially believing it. I apologize. Mrs. Castillo eventually steered the conversation toward constructive solutions. What can we do to prevent something like this from happening again? How do we rebuild community trust? The discussion that followed was thoughtful and measured. Neighbors proposed creating a genuine informal neighborhood association, not with regulatory powers, but focused on communication and community building. Others suggested a contact list of long-time residents whom newcomers could consult if they received suspicious official notices or demands. A respected local teacher offered to host legitimate community gatherings at the public pool, providing the social connection many had sought without infringing on private property rights. The evening progressed. I found myself deeply moved by the community's response. What Karen had attempted to achieve through manipulation and lies, neighborhood cohesion, was actually happening naturally in response to her behavior, but founded on mutual respect rather than false authority. Near the meeting's end, Mr. Garcia raised an unexpected question. What about Karen herself? She's facing serious charges and has obviously alienated everyone, but she'll likely return to the neighborhood eventually. A thoughtful silence followed. Despite everything, there was no appetite for continued conflict or retribution. Perhaps what happened is an opportunity, suggested Mrs. Castillo. Clear boundaries have been established. The legal system is addressing her actions. Maybe now there's a chance for her to recognize the proper way to join a community rather than trying to control it. The consensus that emerged was measured and mature. The community would maintain firm boundaries against entitled behavior while remaining open to reconciliation if Karen chose to change her approach. As we were preparing to leave, a neighbor I'd barely spoken to before approached me. I was at the false snake incident, he admitted. I realize now I've been observing but not participating in our neighborhood for years. That changes tonight. Sometimes it takes a crisis to remind us what community really means. Walking home under streetlights that illuminated familiar houses with new perspective, I reflected on the unexpected outcome of Karen's campaign. Her attempt to control the neighborhood had instead galvanized it into a stronger, more connected community, one founded on genuine relationships rather than fabricated authority. The next morning, a simple text from Officer Rodriguez provided the final piece of the puzzle. Thought you should know. Karen Matthews has listed her house for sale. Moving company scheduled for end of month. The community had reached its verdict through neither confrontation nor banishment, but simply by collectively refusing to enable entitled behavior. For Karen, this natural consequence appeared more effective than any court-ordered penalty. 3 weeks passed with remarkable tranquility. The temporary restraining order remained in effect. Karen kept her distance, and my backyard pool returned to being simply a pool, not a neighborhood battleground or symbol of property rights. I began to relax, gradually reclaiming the peace that had drawn me to this home in the first place. True to Officer Rodriguez's information, a for sale sign appeared in front of Karen's house. The moving company arrived the following weekend, efficiently loading her possessions into a large truck, while neighbors discreetly observed from behind curtains and during coincidental dog walks. Karen herself maintained a low profile during the moving process, a stark contrast to her previous commanding presence. When our paths crossed briefly at the local grocery store, she quickly changed aisles, avoiding eye contact. The confrontation queen suddenly confrontation-averse. According to neighborhood gossip, she had accepted a plea deal for the criminal, charges resulting in probation and mandatory community service rather than jail time. The neighborhood's impromptu organization continued to evolve in positive ways. What began as crisis response transformed into genuine community building. Mrs. Castillo established a monthly coffee gathering for sharing neighborhood news and welcoming newcomers. Mr. Garcia created a simple website with local resources, emergency, contacts and clarification about our non-HOA status, a preemptive measure against future confusion. Most surprisingly, the public pool initiative took off spectacularly. Several neighbors with relevant skills volunteered to renovate the neglected community pool at the local park. The Parks Department, impressed by the neighborhood's organization and commitment, fast-tracked approval for the project. By mid-August, a previously underutilized public facility had been transformed into a vibrant community gathering spot. "We should have focused on improving public resources years ago," Mr. Patel remarked during the pool's reopening celebration. "Sometimes it takes a crisis to redirect energy toward constructive solutions." As summer heat peaked in August, I made a decision that would have been unthinkable during the height of the conflict. I hosted a pool party, not from obligation or coercion, but from genuine desire to share my private space with neighbors who had stood by me during Karen's campaign. The invitation was simple: neighborhood appreciation gathering Saturday 2 to 5 p.m., no falsified documents required for entry. The humorous reference to our shared ordeal brought knowing smiles from recipients. That Saturday, my backyard filled with neighbors bringing potluck dishes, responsible adults supervising children in the pool, and conversations that wove new connections among people who had lived proximately for years without truly knowing each other. "Ironic, isn't it?" Mrs. Castillo observed as we watched children playing in the pool. "Karen wanted access to your pool so badly, she created an entire fictional authority structure. Now that she's gone, you're sharing it freely with the neighborhood. The difference being consent and boundaries," I noted, "sharing by choice rather than coercion." "Exactly," she nodded. "That's true community." As summer transitioned to fall, Karen's house sold quickly. The new owners, a young couple with a toddler, received multiple impromptu welcome visits their first weekend, including from me. "We've heard there was some neighborhood drama recently," the husband mentioned, as I presented them with a houseplant. "Something about pool access and a pretend HOA. Ancient history," I assured them. "But yes, there's no HOA here, just neighbors who respect each other's boundaries while finding legitimate ways to build community." Their relief was palpable. "We specifically avoided HOA neighborhoods," the wife confided. "We believe in property rights balanced with being good neighbors." "You'll fit in perfectly then," I laughed. The final chapter of the pool saga arrived unexpectedly in October, long after swimming season had ended. A certified letter came from Karen's attorney, containing a brief, formally worded apology acknowledging her misunderstanding about property rights and community access. While hardly a heartfelt mea culpa, it represented a significant retreat from her previous position. More meaningful was the enclosed check covering the cost of the cut lock, damaged pool equipment, and security system upgrades, likely a condition of her plea agreement, rather than a spontaneous gesture of remorse. I deposited the check and donated an equal amount to the public pool maintenance fund. Turning Karen's restitution into community benefit felt like the perfect symbolic closure to the conflict. That evening, organizing my files, I came across the thick folder of evidence I'd compiled during the height of the confrontation: police reports, falsified notices, security camera footage, and neighbor statements. After brief consideration, I fed the entire collection into my shredder. The legal matters were resolved, the neighborhood had moved forward, and preserving artifacts of conflict served no purpose. As autumn leaves began falling into my now covered pool, I reflected on the unexpected lessons from a summer of absurd confrontation. What began with an entitled stranger claiming rights to my private property had ultimately strengthened my connection to the community, clarified neighborhood expectations, and even improved public recreation options. Karen had inadvertently catalyzed positive change through her negative example, demonstrating the crucial difference between forced false community built on entitlement versus genuine community founded on respect for boundaries and individual choice. Sometimes the best resolution isn't about winning the battle, but about transforming the battlefield entirely, in this case, from a disputed private pool to a revitalized public one where everyone was legitimately welcome. No falsified HOA membership required.